Welcome to a phenomenal conversation, a radical exploration of reality with renowned scientist, scholar, and mystic Jude Currivan. And before I introduce Jude, I just want to say a little bit about phenomenal conversations. So phenomenal conversations are crafted and curated to help co-create a regenerative worldview. And we do that by interviewing change makers that embody the regenerative change, such as Jude. We also amplify nuance in a very chaotic world. We ask meaningful questions, and we also try to embrace imagination in the midst of the polycrisis. So that's the overview of phenomenal conversations. And unusually today, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to read out Jude's bio because we could spend probably the whole hour just on what Jude's done in her career and all the different explorations and investigations she's done. It's immense. So to save a little bit of time, I'm going to read out Jude's bio, and then we're going to just dive in with a kind of question that I feel has motivated Jude since she, from an early age. So we're going to go with that. So Jude Currivan is a cosmologist, planetary healer, futurist, author, and co-founder of Whole World View. She was previously one of the most senior businesswomen in the UK, has a master's degree in physics from Oxford University, specializing in quantum physics and cosmology, also with a PhD in anthropological archaeology from the University of Reading. She has traveled to nearly 80 countries and worked with wisdom keepers from many traditions, and had her extensive experience and knowledge of world events, systems, and trends has led her to speak on transformational reforms in the UK, US, Europe, Japan, South Korea, and Australasia. And recently, I came across Jude in a couple of lectures where she's launched a video that's kind of like a summation and synthesis of all of her work and investigation called A Radical Guide to Reality. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's kind of inspired me to interview Jude. And we're going to start with a question, Jude. In those talks that I attended, you made quite an unusual statement that I'd like to explore with you, which you said that you were always curious or wanted to explore the nature of reality. And I think that's a very all-consuming and profound question. And I was curious about how that kind of, a little bit, some turning points of how that evolved in your, life.
Thanks, Dave. Well, first of all, it's lovely to be with you, and thanks for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to our exploration today too. Yes, curiosity, I think, is my middle name.
Yeah.
My mum always said that from very early age. And I suppose that the sort of first steps along that lifelong journey of exploration began when I was about 4 years old. And I have told this story a number of times, but it stayed with me so powerfully all my life. And that's when a discarnate light literally appeared in my bedroom, and I started to hear a voice, not through my ears, but in my inner perception. And that really began a journey because, when you're 4 years old, hey, it's not frightening. It wasn't frightening. It was lovely. It was a gentle voice. It was almost an invitation to an adventure. And that adventure's lasted all my life. And, engaging with many, many multidimensional, levels of reality and sentience and awareness, as well as on this beautiful planetary home we have and working with wisdom keepers of many traditions. But because I was experiencing the world in a very different way than then I was being taught at school, than it appeared, my community experienced it, I didn't share my adventures, but I knew enough to realize that what I was being taught at school was not what I was experiencing. And I was guided, I found myself, the universe has a wonderful way of inviting us into these adventures if we're prepared to say yes to them. And they found me, the ancient traditions, the universal wisdom teachings of ancient India, Egypt, China, as well as indigenous teachings came later, but all really weaving the same understanding that I was experiencing. So they became my teachers. And, Yet I was curious enough to want to understand how my experiences literally connected with this physical realm, our universe. And then that led me into science as a methodology, as an exploration. So it's all woven together because ultimately, and this is what I learned very, very young and have experienced, is that mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They're literally what we and the whole world are. And I think that's what I'm going to sort of have carved on my grave. Boltzmann had the entropy equation on
Yeah.
his and all the rest of it. It's a long quote, but that's what I'd like on my grave. Because it is primordial, it's all pervasive. It is the stuff. It is reality. And what that does is it helps us remember that we're not separate, that we're literally inseparable from this vast, grand, wondrous universe and cosmos. So that's been a curiosity. I mean, it's a curiosity that's far more than a lifetime. It's one of those things when you talk to gardeners and they're 80 years old and they say, I'm just learning, I'm just beginning, I'm just learning. That's how I feel. But it's been an incredible journey and an ongoing journey.
That's funny you should say that because one of the quotes I give on my one of my courses is from Pablo Casals. It's about practice. Why do you think your practice? Why do you keep practicing? Oh, because I think I'm improving. It's the same.
This
The
is the
same thing.
beauty of it.
Yeah,
I know. Always, for me, that's the curiosity. For Pablo, it's a sublime skill. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
but I think for all of us, I was being interviewed by someone a while ago. They'd been interviewing a whole raft of folks, and they'd asked each and every one of them, "What is your main focus? What keeps you going?" And everyone said curiosity.
Oh, right, okay. And so, and let's just how did this sort of almost like a mystic or already a mystical intu developing mystical intuition,
Mm.
how come that became a scientific endeavor, not a philosophical, or you didn't go study theology. So
Yeah.
how did that mutate into wanting to study the material world? Because that's what most of science does, as it
Sure.
were. So
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a daughter and granddaughter of my coal miners.
okay.
So talk about grounding.
Yeah, yeah.
So I grew up in the sort of North Midlands of England and in a very grounded community. And my
Yeah,
dad passed when I was 10. So mum brought myself, and my younger brother up as a widow, as a single mom from that. And, I had to, do the ironing for the clothes she took launder to earn pocket money. I
yeah,
had to
yeah,
go out to work Friday nights and Saturday mornings at stacking shelves
yeah, yeah.
from 14 and onwards, which you're allowed to do then. I don't think you're allowed to do it now. But so I've always felt that really was amazing because that did ground me because my explorations, my walking between worlds, I really, at one point, I was very happy to just go off into the cosmos. It was
Right.
very difficult for me to come back, actually,
Mm,
because I was
mm,
having such amazing, insights and explorations and fun and joy. And
mm,
that curiosity was really, wide ranging. But it was so important that I did come back and ground, what I was
mm,
experiencing and ground it in science as
mm.
the language of materiality. But my lifelong journey has shown me that there is no dichotomy between science and spirituality. And so
Okay.
what I share now is the convergence of science
Mm,
and you describe mystical, we could describe them as spiritual, and the nature of consciousness. And we've got the evidence now because,
yeah,
theology and is to a great degree founded on faith.
yeah,
My experiences were direct experiences. I wasn't believing in what I was doing. I was experiencing it directly. But
yeah.
then I also appreciated that if I wasn't able to bring together those experiences, those multidimensional experiences with the physical world, somehow that wasn't fulfilling both my own curiosity, but also I sensed there was a need for this at some point. I
Mm,
didn't know that as a child. It's only been the last few decades I've really appreciated how important this is that these come together based on evidence
Yeah.
will offer an authentic hope, because we've had a worldview of separation of materiality that's brought us to the, you described it, the polycrisis.
Yeah.
I would describe it differently.
Please do. Please
But
do.
without that grounding on this emergent unitive understanding, I don't sense that we can be empowered or inspired or have authentic hope to really move forward, to change and evolve and continue on this great adventure of what being human is all about.
Well, you've actually I touched upon two or three questions I already formulated in that answer,
Sorry.
but that's fine. We might come back to them. So I read out that you got a master's degree in or studied quantum physics, and was the study of that somehow informed by your early experiences of reality not being what is portrayed to you? Were you drawn to that? Could
I was
you?
indeed. Yeah, absolutely, I was,
Yeah.
because before I went to Oxford, before I went to, university at the age of 18, I
Yeah.
was already studying quantum physics at age 9.
Okay.
So, I'd
Yeah.
already had whatever 9 years under my belt, as it were,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was the closest that I could find in science that was being taught at the time that actually correlated with my experiences, and also the ancient traditions. I mean, in Sanskrit, the Vedic tradition of ancient India, the Upanishads and the Gitas, incredible writings. They were the ones that were, I was reading those and going, this is what I'm experiencing. They
Oh,
understood
right.
thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that some of the quantum physicists discovering something that was very different from the mechanistic worldview that they'd been trained as scientists on,
Yeah. Yeah.
where an observer is not separate from that which is observed, where there is the sort of wave particle. I don't like to call it duality, but complementarity. And
Okay.
they were looking to the ancient Vedic tradition to
Yeah.
help understand what they were discovering and getting
Yeah.
evidence for. So it's this long, long track that comes to this point. So yes, quantum physics, but not just that, because there was also this perspective that I knew we could not understand the entirety of our universe if we're only looking at quantum physics, because quantum
Right.
physics only looks at energy and matter. It has no notions of space and time.
Okay.
And so, for close on 100 years now, there's been this apparent inability to reconcile quantum physics, which
Yeah.
was seen as the world of the very small, with relativity physics, the world of the very big. But actually, they are complementary, but we needed to go beyond what the early pioneers understood, what Einstein understood, what
Yeah.
David Bohm and others understood,
Yeah.
because we needed to bring in consciousness, holy
Okay.
consciousness.
Well, that's really interesting because when you launched your video, or I think maybe in the beginning of the video, you made a statement about it's only now that I can release this video because the scientific discoveries have backed it up.
Yeah.
Were you able to elucidate for me and the layman what those discoveries of bringing like consciousness into the picture
Yeah.
as the unitive factor, as it were?
Happy to. And just to mention, Dave, to your listeners, that
Yeah,
in addition to the film, which is free to view, to share, to use on YouTube, it's subtitled in 17 languages from Arabic to Ukrainian.
yeah.
We've also on wholeworld-view.org, which is underneath the YouTube link. If you go to the website, we've got a whole section on the film, but we've got a wraparound for it. So
Okay.
we've got a whole glossary of terms that are in the
Oh,
film.
great.
We've
Yeah.
got a couple of invited experientials that are also audioed. We've got some focus group analysis, and we've got some questions, some suggested invited questions that people might like to ask themselves and each other when they see the film. So we've done that, and the whole website itself is full of free resources on the unity of science, all the evidence. But a couple I'll suggest now, because
Thank you. Yeah.
these are at the scale of the universe. But remember that the same patterns and the same evidence is played out, and we're seeing it at all scales, from the most tiniest to the whole of our universe. So I don't want people to think, oh, it's just the universe, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
These same patterns, this same evidence is playing through our collective human behaviors and choices. So it matters at the very, very everyday relevance of our lived lives. And so two pieces of evidence. One is that right from the beginning of quantum physics, it was realized that for quantum physics to work at all, our entire universe has to be unified. In science, it's called locally unified.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's called entangled.
Yeah.
Physics is really good at confusing folks because instead of a single term, they use entangled or non-local or unified or unitive. I've come to use unitive because it applies so much beyond science in terms of
Okay.
unitive worldview, a unitive narrative, unitive action, whatever. So I'm going to say unitive. So for quantum physics to work at all, our entire universe has to be unitive. In other
Yeah.
words, it exists and evolve as a unitive entity.
Mm.
And it was only in the late 80s that that was able to start to be experimentally verified, but not at the universal scale,
Mm.
beginning at the scale of the laboratory
Mm.
and creating quantum entities, particles, as twin particles, then separate them and realize that if you switch one attribute of one, immediately the other switched.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
that seems to be in contravention of relativity because that says that there is a cosmic speed cop for any signal within space-time, which is the speed of light.
Yeah.
But this was opening up something that seemed to violate that. It doesn't, but it seemed to at the time. Fast forward another 4 decades, and by the sort of 2017, 2018 time, researchers were able to quantum entangle particles, photons of light in the laboratory in that way, with starlight from 600 light years away coming down a telescope, and the whole what's called cascade triggered by light coming from a very active galactic center called a quasar 12.2 billion light years away. So this was taking this unitive understanding experimentally to the scale of the universe. And it was so compelling, and it ties in with both theory and evidence, so compelling that in 2022, the Nobel Prize for Physics was given for this work. And,
Oh, okay.
and the Nobel Prize is only given for settled science.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
controversial, anything not
Yeah.
really grounded and
Yeah.
shown, doesn't get it. So it
So,
was given.
so what was the effect of the starlight? What did it do?
What it does is that the point is that what you've got an experimental setup in the laboratory,
Yeah.
okay? So at the same moment you're creating entangled photons of light in the
Yeah.
lab, you're actually receiving starlight from
Yeah.
600 light years away. So
Yeah.
that's now in the laboratory commingling, as it
Yeah.
were, with those those laboratory photons. But the whole cascade of entanglement
Yeah.
triggered from light from that galactic quasar
Yeah.
12.2 billion light years away. So it's all arriving at the same time. But
Yeah.
the starlight left the star 600 years ago.
Yeah.
The light left the quasar 12.2 billion years ago.
Yeah.
So what we have then is we have a universe-wide experiment played out in the lab, but showing that quantum, the unitive nature of our universe is real. It's
Okay.
fundamental. But then what you say is, well, hang on, doesn't that violate relativity theory? Doesn't it violate this signaling within space-time? No, it doesn't, because we now appreciate that our universe exists and evolves in such a unitive way. Think of a balloon,
Yeah.
okay, expanding. So on the boundary of the balloon is all the information that's then projected within what we call space-time as our universe. It's called
Right.
cosmic hologram, and
Yeah.
it's a holographic principle. But
Yeah.
what that means is within space-time, from the very first moment, nearly 14 billion years ago, space has expanded ever since, as time has flowed forward ever since. Yes, there is the cosmic speed limit of the speed of light, and it has to be for that finite universe to not just exist but evolve as it does, for that flow of time to take that incredible evolutionary journey to this point. So within space-time, yes, there is causality.
Yeah.
Yes, there is the flow of time. And at the same, and also our universe exists and evolves as its unitive entity. So it knows itself. So just like a hologram, where the whole is experienced in every part, so the wholeness of our universe, our sentient, living universe, expresses itself through this space-time and energy matter of
Oh, I
its.
think you've just clarified something. This is one of the questions I thought we might not get to, but you've explained it so beautifully. Because I always think of holograph as this kind of image projected in science fiction films as a kind of 3D mirage, as it were. But when you talk about holographic, you're talking about the kind of inevitable entanglement or relationship that the whole universe is in within itself all of the time. That's what you
Absolutely.
mean. It's
Absolutely.
not
I
a
do.
projection of an image or
It's
something
not a
like that.
projection of an image, but it is a projection of cosmic mind.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that boundary of what we call space-time, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the information is held. So it really is a projection, but it doesn't make our universe less real. It's
No,
just the
no.
way that the infinite, eternal, oh, genius of cosmic mind creates universes as thought forms,
Yeah. Yeah.
literally as a cosmic thought, as a universal thought that's been going on and exploring and self and experiencing itself and evolving itself
Mm.
for nearly 14 billion years, and then expressing that sentience in individuated self-awareness.
Well, that's something you also pointed to in the rocks that I think is well known to indigenous people, but you were talking about how rocks and what we would regard as solid matter also has sentience as well. So how does sentience play out in what we would say as in a solid object as a rock or dense matter, as it were?
Well, first of all, denseness is an attribute of the laws of physics. The appearance of denseness, the appearance of solidity,
Yeah,
is an attribute of the law of physics.
yeah,
And basically, it's that no quantum particle can exist in the same quantum state at the same time, in the
yeah,
same place. So that means that instead of sort of everything merging into a great loop, we have differentiation, not separation, but differentiation. So
yeah,
atoms, for example, and onward from that scale upwards. So, but when we dig down, as physicists, when we dig down, what becomes apparent, literally apparent of the appearance, is that the nature of our universe is 99.12 nines after the decimal point percent no thingness. It's about relationships of information. And
yeah,
that information, and I always stress the information with a hyphen because it's meaningful, it's
yeah,
universally meaningful, is what literally informs the appearance
yeah,
of our universe. And so in that regard, cosmic mind, universal mind expresses itself as digitized information at the most minute scale, which is named after a quantum pioneer called Max Planck. But that
yeah,
scale, if you think of high definition communications and technologies, the image we're seeing each other through is an HD, a high definition image, which if we actually go tinier and tinier, it's pixelated, but the pixelation is tiny.
mm,
The point is that the pixelation of our high definition technologies now is not much bigger than an atom. But what I'm talking about is universal pixelation of information that's as tiny to an atom as the atom is to the whole universe.
yeah. So we don't really have a scale for it or a measure for that degree of
We do, but
we do.
the beauty of that measure is that it's a measure that doesn't rely on our definitions of measure. So we, for example, measure length in meters or
Yeah,
yards.
yeah,
In
yeah,
old money, yards, but
yeah.
let's talk meters here.
Yeah.
The scale of the pixelation of the information that builds up then to form atoms and molecules and planets and onwards is 10 to the minus 35 meters.
Wow.
Okay, that
Yeah.
is trillions and more times smaller than our best high definition technologies.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And each one of those tiny, it's like a tiny area on the boundary. Think of the sort of two-dimensional boundary of space and time. What you have then is each of those tiny, what's called Planck scale areas, has one bit of information in it.
Yeah.
But when it builds up, because it's so much tinier than an atom, by the time you get to the scale of a proton or a neutron, a quark, an electron, and onwards, you have vast amounts of information, even at that scale. Then continue it up, and there's vastness on vastness on vastness of information. But we do, the really important point that I think is convincing, scientists across the piece, that this is the nature of reality, is the Planck scale is very special,
Yeah.
because what it does is when you bring the laws of physics together and the main attributes of our universe, so energy, matter, space, time, and temperature, the Planck scale just drops out of the equations.
Yeah.
And although I've said, the Planck length is 10 to the minus 35 meters, actually, you can define it in terms of the speed of light. So the
Okay.
Planck length is the length that a light beam travels in one Planck moment. So it's called normalization. It means it doesn't matter whether we measure in meters and seconds or, popsicles or Tic Tacs or whatever. So any self-aware beings who are able to sort of come to this level of awareness, the Planck scale is like a gift
Hmm.
waiting for them, because they would realize the same thing, that it's the basic structure of the nature of our universe.
And given that you're kind of like really at the progressive integrative edge of science and reality, as it were, to what degree is that um, property of the Planck scale large recognized, what recognized in, say, more mainstream views of quantum physics?
I think anybody who's studying quantum physics now
Yeah.
realizes that Planck scale is saying something very fundamental
Yeah.
about the nature of reality, the nature of our universe as reality.
Right.
And I'd say that most cosmologists now adhere to what's called the holographic principle, that
Right.
our
Okay.
universe, manifests its reality holographically. It all stacks up. The reason I think it's so compelling is that the evidence isn't just at that cosmological scale I spoke of earlier.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
another piece of evidence, because I said I'd share two pieces. In 2017, a consortium of scientists were looking at what's called the cosmic microwave background,
Yeah.
CMB.
Yeah.
And what that is about 380,000 years after the beginning of space-time, beginning of our universe, space has expanded and cooled sufficiently to become transparent to light. Before that, it was transparent to sound, and there's a whole beautiful story about that, but it had become transparent to light. And what that had is it sort of then froze into the temperature differences that were there at the time, patterns.
Mm.
And as space continued to expand ever since, the frequencies of those, the wavelengths of those patterns have, stretched because of the space expanding. So that's what we see now as the cosmic microwave background. And when you analyze the very tiny temperature fluctuations throughout it, you see the same so-called fractal, so named fractal patterns as you see at the scale of atoms, where electrons pattern themselves fractally when an element changes from an insulator to a metal. We see them at molecular scales, we see them at planetary scales, we see them at scales of our solar system, we see them in the scales of galaxies and vast clusters of galaxies, all the way up from the tiniest to the biggest. We see these same self-referencing patterns of relationships, and they play out not just through what we might call the natural world, but they play out through our behaviors and structures and all. So for example, we see the same fractal patterns in ecosystems as we do in the internet.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We see the same, they're not fractal patterns, but they're related, which are called power laws, which are relationships between the frequency of a phenomenon and its power. That's why they're called power laws,
Mm.
showing that there's just a simple relationship. So as you scale up or you scale down, which is part of it, you have this relationship between frequency and power. So these power laws we find in earthquakes,
All
in
right.
terms of the frequency and their destructive power. We find them in human conflicts.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Wow.
Mm.
Because the point, therefore, is everything is mind and consciousness. So the underlying patterns of mindfulness and consciousness, for example, our collective consciousness,
Yeah.
plays out in behaviors that are, are whatever our collective consciousness is, where it's at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if so, conflicts have been in a sense, an outcome of our worldview of separation. If
Yeah.
we can remember that we're inseparable, if we can wake up to appreciate that we are innately interdependent with the whole world, then we can evolve our perception and we can change our behaviors. And so instead of conflicts, peace then becomes a natural outcome.
Well, I was struck by that message in the video, and I think it's not that difficult to cognitively appreciate what you're saying, but to get it on an experiential level with your whole being seems
Exactly.
to be another order of recognition.
I agree.
What do you think enables that to occur? The kind of um, full-hearted or full embrace of that non-duality, as the mystics might call it.
Well, I think, somebody said, I think whoever said it, we're everyday mystics. This is who we really are at foundation.
Yeah,
I would say that, first of all, it's fundamental. It's not just about understanding this, because a lot of folks, rightly so, don't need to understand the science. But
yeah,
it's like a car in a way. Not
yeah,
everybody needs to know how the engine works, but you really need to know, if you get into a car, the wheels aren't going to drop off. And
yeah,
so I would say that providing all of this evidence to help, there's a beautiful, simple framework that brings it all together, to reveal that our universe is essentially living and loving, because it's
yeah,
in
yeah,
relationship and evolving as a unitive being, a thought form in the great mind of the cosmos. But then you're right, it's about experiencing it. What I would suggest is that that's already happening,
right.
because people are appreciating all around the world that we cannot go on as we are. And
Yeah,
we can either fall into fear or we can leap into love.
right,
And that is literally not a metaphor. This is literally our choice at the moment. So
right.
for me and all the work I do, it's inviting people. It's not trying to impose anything, but it's
No. Mm.
inviting people
Yeah.
into this adventure of love, and appreciating that, for me, it's an invitation of the universe to step into this perception and come together.
I'm wondering if I could change tack just slightly, going back to quantum physics. I mean, you've very eloquently explained so many different dimensions of quantum physics and reality. But in the kind of new age circles, or there's this longing to validate spirituality and mysticism. But I sometimes feel that quantum physics is being misappropriated
I agree.
to back that up. And I'm wondering, how you maintain rigor, being true to, the kind of logic and rationality of science, and but then also being able to integrate this other reality that you've so eloquently described, because I feel that a disservice is being done by boot kind of shortcutting between the two uh, elements, as it were.
I think that's a very important point, and I'm not blaming or shaming or judging anyone.
No.
I'm a both and girl.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm presented with an either or, I go, what about both? What about both and? And
Yeah.
it's the same, the thing is, quantum physics, we do know quantum physics isn't the whole story. Because
Yeah.
quantum physics is only about energy matter, and it's beautiful. And by reframing it in terms of information, it takes it into that ability then to be complementary with the relativistic physics of space and time.
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
done that in my books and some of my more recent writings. And it does so very straightforwardly. So the reliance on quantum physics sometimes takes away from the grounding within space time that we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
for me, it's the both and that's what the evidence is showing. That's what the framework, the unitive framework is showing. We need both and. So
Yeah.
in that regard, a beloved friend of mine, Elizabeth Sartoris, who's literally recently passed.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah, but oh,
Yeah.
what a wonderful, beautiful soul sister.
Mhm.
But she says something that's really helpful in my perspective. She talks about a piano keyboard.
Yeah.
And she talks about a piano keyboard where the lowest notes are essentially the physical realm. And the higher you go, the more sort of, you move into the spiritual and higher
Yeah.
realms as
Yeah.
such. But there's no judgment about lower and higher, and there's no separation.
Yeah.
Except
Yeah.
within the physical realm, there is a sort of a boundary
Mm.
of our physicalized experience, but nonetheless, it doesn't separate us
Yeah.
from the multidimensional realms of spirituality,
Yeah.
which are the underlying causative realms as well.
Yeah.
It's all part of the same piano keyboard. So she
Mhm.
says, I mean, she's so wonderful, so feisty. She talks about sometimes the folks on the top end of the notes are going, oh, and the folk at the bottom end are going, no, rubbish, rubbish.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all of it. And
Yeah.
that's what I teach. And I don't teach. That's what I share because that's both my experience, but it's also the best evidence, not just of myself, but the incredible folks on whose shoulders we all stand for
Sure.
millennia, for millennia.
Well, I like that, and a lovely analogy, and I think that illustrates a lot. I was a member of, when I lived in England, of the Science and Medical Network, and we'd get very inspired scientists there that weren't wedded to the reductive worldview of their peers. And I think you're really articulating an expression of it. But I had this vision of what if science, uh, religion, philosophy, and the rest of the disciplines could co-explore in true partnership these deeper questions like the nature of reality. It seems like you're pioneering that. What do you see the potential of a true dialogue rather than this, it's reductive or it's not, the binary
Sure.
way that we're operating at the moment?
Well, first of all, I feel that that is already changing and
Yeah,
changing rapidly. And
yeah,
it's changing, funnily, in my experience, it's often being guided either by more elderly scientists who don't have to get tenure.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
lot of there's a lot of emeritus and
yeah.
emerita scientists out there who are saying it as they see it now, rather than
Yeah.
how they felt
They've
they
come out of
have
the
to.
closet,
They've come
according
out
to
of the
leadership.
closet. They're free. They're flying free. And at the younger end, younger scientists who just want to follow the evidence wherever it leads, which is, I think, a reason why most people come into science. And then the system, if you like, in various ways sort of dampens that down. And,
Yeah,
and mavericks and renegades and, like myself, who've followed this all my life and avoided being in an academic environment where that might have been very difficult. I'm now being invited to chair academic conferences
are
internationally
you? Right.
and
Okay.
present
Brilliant.
internationally on all of this. I've just done two actually, one in Barcelona where I chaired it and one in Amsterdam. And I've been invited to do that next year too. And I'm saying no to a lot of them. So
Yeah.
this is really moving because I think that what the scientists who are saying yes to this are appreciating how strong the evidence is at all
Right.
scales.
Yeah.
And so I think it's moving fast. But the other thing I would say, Dave, is that this is far too important to be limited to scientists. This is ours, this is our everyday lives. This is what
Yeah.
choices we make. And that
Yeah.
goes back to your description of a polycrisis. I tend to call it a metacrisis. And I've just written a piece that suggests we reframe that from
Mm.
metacrisis to metamorphosis.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Um,
that too is on the website, but it's also in various places. Because if we see this as essentially the potential to consciously evolve as a species
yeah,
and wake up and experience, the wholeness, the inseparability. We're unique. We're not unity isn't uniformity.
yeah, yeah,
Radical diversity, but it's also helping us to realize that we belong to this incredible universe of ours. We
yeah.
are its microcosmic co-creators. Yeah.
I think that sometimes when I'm leading a meditation, I like to describe it as a bio-friendly universe.
Very much so. Very much so. And it's
Well,
friendly,
let's
regardless of whether we're bio or not bio. It for me,
yeah. Well, let's wrap it up because I think that this notion of not poly, not meta, but metamorphosis is interesting because your video, Radical Guide to Reality, ends on a very hopeful note. And obviously, the hopefulness is coming out of this integration of
yes,
ways of being and understanding the universe as a living system. But relative to how nascent that is, even in the science as well, and the kind of scale of the uh, degradation and destruction we brought upon the planet,
sure.
how do you see the future? I mean, unfolding from, okay, we've got a very nascent understanding, which is barely born. And then we've got, science telling us a lot of ecosystemic planetary crises that could rapidly deteriorate, how we live and where we live. What's your sense of what might unfold in the next 2 or 3 years, if I could ask you that?
It really is down to our choices. It's as
Yeah,
simple as that. It's what our choices are in every moment and what is ours to do. Asking ourselves what is ours to do. What is yours to do is
yeah,
different from what is mine to do. And yet
yeah,
we're both serving this opportunity, this moment of choice, this evolutionary impulse flowing through us.
yeah,
And many, many, many people are doing this all over the world in many different ways.
yeah,
And, I was in New York in September, in part well, guided by something called a deep and rapid transformation convergence. Mouthful, I know, but it was in answer to a response to the United Nations Secretary General saying, we can't go on as we are.
yeah, yeah,
We have to, undertake deep and rapid transformation. So a group of change makers serving this unitive perspective and unitive narrative and unity in diversity in action came together to see how we could continue to move forward and synergize efforts. And also at the United Nations. So I was at the United Nations for Summit of the Future and worked with some of the folks who put together Pact for the Future. And what we were saying was the Pact for the Future is like a leaky boat. But
yeah.
it sets sail. It still sets sail. So what can we do to not just plug the holes in it, but to help it
Yeah,
again continue to emerge and change and grow? So we did work on how unitive science
yeah,
and how a unitive perspective can then continue to nurture and grow and evolve, not just the Pact for the Future. We've done work on the implications of unitive science for technology, unitive science for economics, unitive science for education, all from this piano keyboard perspective
yeah, yeah, yeah,
of wholeness in everyday lives. And at Whole World View, we talk about act local, because for
yeah,
each of us, it's that grounds us. Feel global
yeah,
and think cosmic,
yeah,
because the cosmos is breathing through us. It's big breath, as I describe it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Breathe through our little breaths in every moment. So let's breathe that vast, beautiful, living, loving universe into us, through us. And as we breathe out, breathe its love and our intention into the world.
That's really, really beautiful. And I think that actually your video represents that. And we'll wrap it up there and I'll stop the video. So thanks so much for sharing such deep and also precise wisdom and knowledge and understanding of the scientific perspective, which I think even people like me could benefit from knowing a bit more about, even though I've sort of dabbled in it a bit. But thanks so much, Jude, and I'm going to stop the recording.
You're very welcome, Dave, and thanks everyone.
Yeah.